Hey, welcome back to Horror for Asleep. I know a lot of you put these stories on as you drift off, so before you get comfortable, I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. And if these videos have been keeping you company in the dark, a like and a subscription really do help more than you think. Now, get comfortable, settle in, take a slow breath, and let's begin a new story. There is something about the deep American wilderness that resists explanation. Not the kind of wilderness you drive past on a highway, framed neatly between guardrails and exit signs, but the kind that begins where the roads stop being named and ends somewhere no surveyor has ever thought to mark on a map. The kind of wilderness that, when you stand at its edge at dusk and peer into it, gives you the distinct and involuntary sensation that something inside is peering back. This is a story about two brothers. It is also a story about a piece of land in the rural interior of the American Southwest that locals have been quietly afraid of for longer than most of them can say. It is a story that, depending on who you ask, is either a tragedy rooted in grief and misfortune or something considerably harder to categorize. What follows is drawn from Sheriff's Department records, archived interview transcripts, search and rescue documentation, and the accounts of several individuals who were involved, directly or otherwise, in the events that unfolded over the course of one late October weekend, in a year that the families involved have asked not be published. The names of the brothers have been preserved as they appeared in official records. All other identifying details have been altered or withheld at the request of surviving family members. Jason and Alex were the sons of Harold and Margaret Calloway, lifelong residents of a small town in the high desert of the American Southwest. They're a place of about 4,000 people that sat at the junction of two state highways and existed primarily to serve the ranching and timber interests that surrounded it on all sides. Harold had worked for the county road department for 31 years before his health declined. Margaret had worked part-time at a pharmacy in the center of town for nearly as long. By all accounts, they were ordinary people who had raised two ordinary sons. Jason, the elder of the 2x4 years, had left town at 23 to attend a university several states away. He had studied civil engineering, found steady employment with a regional construction firm, married a woman named Dana, and eventually settled in a mid-sized city in the neighboring state. He had two children, a daughter of 9 and a son of 6 at the time of these events. He worked long hours, coached his daughter's soccer team on weekends, and by all observable measures had built exactly the kind of life he had always said he wanted when he was young. Alex had stayed. This was not, as far as anyone who knew him could tell, a decision born of failure or inertia. It was simply who Alex was. He was 34 years old, unmarried, and employed as a groundskeeper at a small regional nature preserve about 12 miles outside of town. He was, by the account of his supervisor, one of the most conscientious employees the preserve had ever had. He knew the land. He knew where the elk came to drink in the early morning and where the soil shifted from clay to sand and which trails flooded in March. He spent his days outdoors and his evenings at home reading or calling his parents, who lived less than a mile away. State records indicate that Harold Calloway had been admitted to the county hospital twice in the 18 months preceding October of that year. The first admission was for a cardiac episode described in clinical notes as moderate but concerning. The second, 6 months later, was for a respiratory infection that had complicated his already labored heart function. He had recovered both times, but the family understood, as families in these situations often do, without being told directly, that the window was narrowing. It was this understanding that had prompted Alex to reach out to his brother in early September, proposing the camping trip. The two of them had not spent more than a few hours in each other's company in over 3 years. Life had done what life does. But with their father's health declining and neither of them ready to say what they both understood to be true, Alex had written to Jason in a message that a mutual friend later described as simple and quiet, saying only that it felt like time. Jason had agreed without deliberation. They chose the weekend of October 19th, when Jason could arrange 3 days away from work. They would camp in the hills east of town, in the stretch of forested high desert that both of them had explored as children with their father, before the years had put distance between everything. The area was largely undeveloped, accessed by a single unpaved fire road that forked twice before terminating at a clearing locals used for hunting camp in the fall. From there, the brothers had always continued on foot, following a trail their father had shown them when they were boys. What neither of them appears to have fully acknowledged, at least not to each other, was that the trail led through a section of land with a particular history. The land in question had been the subject of quiet local tension for the better part of 2 generations. It bordered the eastern edge of what had once been a much larger territory belonging to an indigenous nation whose name and history the county's official records treat with the kind of deliberate vagueness that tends to suggest discomfort rather than ignorance. The land had changed hands several times in the late 19th and early 20th centuries through a sequence of transactions that local historians have described with considerable care as legally questionable at best. By the time Jason and Alex were children, it was technically unincorporated county land, neither preserved nor developed, simply existing in the way that contested land often does, through a kind of institutional forgetting. Harold Calloway had known the land's history. He had grown up in the town and had absorbed the way children absorb the unspoken things adults believe, without stating that the Eastern Hills were not a place you camped in after dark. He had taken his sons there during the day, he had brought them home before sunset, and when they were old enough to understand the shape of a prohibition, without being given its explicit content, he had told them simply that the land deserved respect and that trespassing on it after nightfall was not something he was willing to do and not something he expected them to do either. Jason and Alex had made him a promise. They were, in October of that year, gonna break it. Dispatch logs from the county sheriff's office show that the brothers arrived at the Fire Road trailhead at approximately 3:14 in the afternoon on Friday, October 19th. A ranch hand employed by a property adjacent to the clearing reported seeing a dark blue pickup truck and a silver sedan parked in the gravel lot when he drove past around 4 in the evening. He noted nothing unusual. The weather that weekend was forecast to be cool but clear, with overnight temperatures dropping into the low 40s. What the forecast did not account for was the fog. It came in after midnight on Friday. According to the statement Alex gave to a county search and rescue volunteer named Patricia Oakes 11 days later, Alex described it as unlike any fog he had encountered in his years working outdoors. Not the drifting, translucent kind that settles in valleys and burns off by mid-morning, but something denser and more deliberate, a fog that seemed to arrive with intent. By the time Jason mentioned it, they were already lying on their sleeping pads beneath a clear sky, which itself should have made fog impossible. And yet, it gathered at the perimeter of the clearing they had made camp in, somewhere between 50 and 70 feet out in every direction, still enough that they could see the individual shapes of trees at the edge of it, and beyond those trees, nothing. Jason had attributed it to a temperature inversion. Alex had not argued, but he later told Patricia Oakes that even at the time, something about the fog had struck him as wrong in a way he could not articulate. It was not any single feature of it. It was the combination, the silence that had come with it, the fact that the wind, which had been steady and mild through the evening, had stopped entirely at the same moment the fog appeared. The fact that, as far as Alex could tell, no sound was coming from within it. He had spent enough time in the wilderness to understand that forests are not quiet at night. They are full of sound. Insects, wind, the distant call of an owl, the soft percussion of small animals moving through underbrush, all of that had stopped. It was into this silence that the first animal appeared. Alex saw it first. A raccoon, he said. It came from the direction of the fog and stopped at the far edge of the firelight, perhaps 15 feet away. He pointed it out to Jason, and they both watched it. The raccoon did not behave the way raccoons behave. It did not forage, it did not look at the food bag, it stood still and looked at them. The brothers made small movements, the kind that typically sends small animals retreating immediately, and the raccoon did not move. It remained for several minutes before departing back in the direction of the fog. The deer came next, then something that Alex described as possibly a fox, though he admitted he could not be certain in the dark. Then a bird, a large one, which settled in a branch directly above their camp and sat motionless for so long that Alex eventually stopped looking at it. Each of these animals shared the same characteristic stillness. Each of them looked at the brothers with what Alex repeatedly described in his statement and in later conversations as attention. Focused, patient, and entirely unnatural attention. Investigators never confirmed whether the sequence of animal appearances was as Alex described. There is no physical evidence to support or contradict his account. What is documented is what came last: the gray wolf. The wolf entered the camp slowly and without the kind of body language that wildlife officials associate with aggression. It did not bare its teeth, it did not growl. It walked toward the brothers at a steady pace and stopped when it was approximately 5 feet from where they sat. Alex, in his statement to Patricia Oakes, described the experience of being looked at by the wolf as something qualitatively different from any animal encounter he had had in his years working outdoors. He used the word recognition. He said the wolf looked at them the way a person looks at someone they know from a long time ago and are deciding whether or not to acknowledge. And then, according to Alex, it stood up. What Alex described in the minutes that followed was, by his own admission, something he has never been able to fully translate into language. He said the wolf stood onto its hind legs. He said the shape of it began to change. He said the sound it made was not the sound of an animal, but something that his body registered before his mind did, a sound that moved through him rather than reaching him from outside. He said Jason grabbed his arm. He said neither of them could speak or move for a period of time he estimated at between 30 seconds and 2 minutes. He said the thing that stood before them at the end of that period was shaped like a man. The man, as Alex described him, was perhaps in his 60s or 70s. He was not large. He wore clothing that Alex described as old and dark. Clothing that looked, he said, like it had been worn continuously for a very long time. His eyes were light, almost yellow in the firelight. The man said something. Alex reported 2 things the man said with certainty. The first was short, something to the effect of an assertion about the land. The second was a laugh. The laugh, Alex said, lasted for a long time and changed while it was happening. He struggled in his statement to explain precisely what he meant by this, and Patricia Oakes, in her notes on the interview, wrote simply, "Subject becomes visibly distressed when asked to clarify." She did not press further. What followed was a period of movement through the forest that Alex could only describe as something between running and dreaming. He said they were aware of being kept from the direction of their vehicles. He said that several times the shape of the man appeared ahead of them rather than behind, which should have been impossible. He said that the sounds coming from within the fog were not sounds he could identify. He said that at some point he was no longer certain which direction they were moving in or how much time had passed. The cabin was not on any map Alex had ever seen of the area. He was familiar with the terrain. He had worked the surrounding preserve land for years. He said he had never known of a structure in that part of the forest. Archive notes from a county land survey conducted in the 1950s reference a small structure described as a hunting outpost at the eastern margin of what was then classified as undeveloped territory. The survey noted the structure was abandoned and in poor condition. No subsequent survey appears to have followed up on this entry. The brothers entered the cabin. Alex's account of what they found inside is not reproduced in full in the official search and rescue documentation. Patricia Oakes noted in her report that she made a determination, based on the condition of the subject and the nature of his disclosures, to record only the general outline of his account and to refer detailed transcription to the County Mental Health Services Coordinator, which she did. What is summarized in the report is this. The interior of the cabin contained the remains of a significant number of animals. There were also, in one of the back rooms, remains that the subject believed to be human. The subject was not able to confirm the number. He reported being in a state of significant psychological distress at the time of entering the room. The man entered the cabin behind them. Alex has never given a full account of what happened after that. He has spoken in fragments to Patricia Oakes, to a mental health counselor, and to one journalist whose account was never published at the family's request. The fragments are consistent with each other in their outlines and inconsistent in their details in the way that traumatic memory often is. He says he lost consciousness at some point. He says he does not know how much time passed. He says he woke outside in daylight near the fire road with no clear memory of how he had gotten there. Jason was not with him. Dispatch logs show that a call came in to the county sheriff's office at 6:42 in the morning on Sunday, October 21st, from a gas station on the highway 8 miles from the Fire Road trailhead. The caller identified himself as Alex Calloway and reported that his brother was missing. He was described by the dispatcher as quiet and coherent, but speaking in a very slow and careful way, as if he was concentrating very hard on each word. Responding deputies found him at the gas station, seated on the curb without shoes. His hands were lacerated. He was wearing only one article of outer clothing, despite overnight temperatures that had dropped to 38 degrees. He was transported to the county hospital. The search for Jason Calloway began that afternoon and continued for 6 days, involving county search and rescue, state park rangers, and eventually a volunteer group from a neighboring county. They searched the hill country east of town systematically. They found the brothers' camp on the second day. They found the fire ring, the sleeping equipment, and Jason's pack. They did not find the cabin Alex had described. They did not find Jason. On the 5th day of the search, a tracker with the volunteer group reported finding a set of footprints at the eastern edge of the search perimeter that he could not account for. He described them in a written note to the search coordinator as belonging to a large barefoot individual. The prints led east, deeper into the hills, and ended without explanation in a shallow dry wash. No further prints were found. Investigators never confirmed the significance of the footprints. The search was officially suspended after 6 days. 11 days after Jason Calloway was reported missing, a security camera at a truck stop 4 states to the east captured footage of a man matching his description, purchasing a bottle of water, and standing at the edge of the parking lot for approximately 7 minutes before walking out of frame. The footage was forwarded to the county sheriff's department and reviewed by Jason's wife Dana, who stated that she believed the man in the footage was her husband but could not be certain. She noted that his posture was different. She said she could not define the difference precisely, but that something about the way he was standing did not match the way he had stood before. 2 eyewitnesses in the same truck stop described the man independently. Both mentioned his smile. One described it as wide and pleasant. The other, a woman who had been eating at the diner counter when the man passed the window, said it was the kind of smile that made her feel as if something was wrong, though she was unable to explain why. Jason Calloway was never located. Alex Calloway returned to work at the nature preserve 4 months later. His supervisor noted in a brief internal memo that he seemed well and continued to perform his duties with the same care he always had. However, she also noted in a handwritten addition to the memo that she told no one about for several years that there was one difference she could not fully explain. Alex had always had an easy and unremarkable relationship with the animals at the preserve, the kind that develops naturally in someone who spends years working quietly in the same landscape. After his return, animals in the preserve avoided him. Not aggressively, not obviously. Simply in the way that animals sometimes avoid a place or a presence without explanation, calmly and consistently, and without apparent cause. Harold Calloway died the following spring, never having been told the full account of what had happened to his sons in the Eastern Hills. He died believing, as his wife had gently allowed him to believe, that Jason had simply gone somewhere for reasons that were not yet understood and might return when he was ready. Whether this was mercy or necessity, Margaret Calloway has never said. The cabin Alex described has never been located. The land in the Eastern Hills remains what it has always been, unincorporated, unsurveyed in any recent record, unbothered by development or inquiry. Locals who remember the old stories tend not to speak about it at length, not out of any organized secrecy, but simply because there are things that small communities understand, through long experience, are better left at the edge of conversation. What happened to Jason and Alex Calloway in those hills on the night of October 19th remains, in the formal sense, unresolved. There is no case file for the land itself. There is no investigation into the man that Alex described, nor into the cabin, nor into the nature of what the brothers encountered in the hours between midnight and dawn. There is only what Alex said, quietly and carefully, to Patricia Oakes on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after he had walked out of those hills alone. He said that before his brother disappeared, he had heard him say something, a single sentence, and he was not certain, even sitting in that room with the morning light coming through the window, whether it had been Jason's voice or something else wearing it. The sentence was this: "This is not our land." Patricia Oakes wrote it down. She did not ask Alex to clarify what he meant. She closed her notebook, and they sat in the quiet for a moment, and then she told him he could go home. He thanked her and walked outside into a morning that looked exactly like any other morning, and he got into his truck and he drove back the way he had come. And somewhere in the eastern hills, in the direction he had driven away from, the trees stood still in a wind that did not move, and the fog held its position at the tree line. And whatever lives in that country went on doing what it has always done, patient and unhurried, waiting for the next visitor who does not know to be afraid. Some cases, as anyone who works in rural law enforcement will tell you, do not close. They simply become part of the landscape. There are places in this country that do not announce themselves. They do not appear on tourist maps or in travel guides. They are not marked by roadside plaques or commemorative signs. They exist quietly, folded into the landscape the way old scars fold into skin, present, permanent, and largely ignored by those who have never had reason to look closely. Silver Gap is one of those places. And for those who have passed through it at the wrong hour, on the wrong night, the memory of what they encountered there does not leave easily. Some say it does not leave at all. What follows is an account drawn from testimony, local records, and the kind of careful listening that small communities are rarely given credit for. The events described took place over a period of years in a rural stretch of southern West Virginia, where the railroad cuts between two creek valleys, and where the woods on one side of that cut have always felt, to those who pay attention to such things, just slightly different from the woods on the other. The town of Oak Hill sits at the edge of Fayette County in the southern coalfields of West Virginia, a place where the mountains are old enough to have forgotten their own names, and the hollows between them run deep and cold even in midsummer. It is the kind of town that has known better days. The storefronts on Main Street carry the quiet dignity of buildings that once served a purpose and now serve a memory. The churches are well attended. The high school football team earns its loyalty. People know each other, and they know each other's business, and on the whole, that is considered more comfort than burden. To the west of Oak Hill, the land folds and rises toward a ridge that separates the valley of Loop Creek from the valley of Paint Creek. It is rough country up there, not dramatic in the way of higher peaks, but persistent in its difficulty, a terrain that discourages casual exploration and rewards only those with a specific destination in mind. The Norfolk Southern Rail Line cuts through this ridge at a natural low point that locals have long called Silver Gap. The name appears in county records as far back as 1891, though the origin of the designation is not entirely clear. Some older residents have suggested it refers to the way winter fog collects in that particular notch of land, appearing from a distance as a pale shimmer between the dark tree lines. Others have offered different explanations, none of them satisfying, most of them trailing off into uncertainty. What is documented is this. On the Oak Hill side of Silver Gap, residential neighborhoods extend within reasonable walking distance of the tracks. Houses with porch lights, streets with names. Children who grow up knowing the sound of freight trains passing in the night, the way children in other places grow up knowing the sound of traffic or ocean waves. Collins School sits at the edge of this inhabited zone, and the neighborhoods clustered near Round Hill Road represent the outermost edge of what might be called the settled world in that particular direction. Beyond the gap, on the far side of the ridge, there is no one. State survey maps from 1984 confirm that the land on the western slope descending toward Paint Creek contains no permanent residential structures for a distance of at least 7 miles. There are old logging roads, several of which dead end into overgrown clearings that serve no obvious current purpose. There are the ruins of what may have been a company housing settlement from the early mining era, though local historians have been unable to agree on which company or which era. And there is the railroad, continuing westward in its straight, indifferent way, carrying coal and aggregate and the occasional mixed freight through a corridor of trees that has seen very little human presence for decades. It was along this corridor that 3 young people found themselves one autumn evening further from home than they had intended to be. The details of that night come primarily from one of the 3, a young man who was, at the time, in his mid-teens. He has since grown into adulthood, and he offered his account with the measured, slightly reluctant quality of someone who has long since accepted that what he experienced will not be easily explained and has made a kind of peace with that fact. His companions from that evening have largely declined to speak on the record, though one of them, reached briefly by a researcher documenting local folklore in 2009, confirmed only that the night had been real and that she preferred not to revisit it. The three of them had set out in the early evening with no particular plan, as teenagers in small towns often do. The railroad tracks offered a familiar route, a straight, walkable path that connected the neighborhoods near Collins School to a stretch of open ground where young people sometimes gathered, away from the observation of parents and the interruption of household schedules. The tracks were not a secret, exactly, but they were also not a route that adults had much occasion to use. They belonged, in the informal geography of that community, to the young. The evening stretched longer than intended, as evenings do. By the time the three of them began making their way back toward Oak Hill, the light had faded to the particular quality that comes in the hour after true sunset, not complete darkness, but a blue-gray dimness in which shapes remain visible and distances become difficult to judge. There was enough ambient light to see the railbed, to pick out the pale stones along the ties, to navigate without stumbling, but not enough to see clearly into the tree line on either side. Dispatch logs from the Fayette County Communications Center show no unusual calls from the area that evening. The night was quiet. No reported accidents, no weather events, no reason for concern. The temperature had dropped into the low 50s, which is unremarkable for that time of year in those mountains. A light wind was noted by a weather station approximately 12 miles to the east, though local conditions in the gap itself are known to differ from regional readings. Given the way the terrain channels and concentrates airflow through that particular notch, the young man's account is consistent across multiple tellings. When they reached the place where the tracks pass through Silver Gap, where the ridge rises on both sides, and the tree line comes close to the ballast on the western edge, he became aware of something in the woods above the track on the right-hand side. He described it, in his original account and in subsequent conversations, as a gray form, approximately the height of a person, standing still among the trees on the bank above the railbed. He was careful, even years later, about what he claimed. He did not say it was a person. He said it was the height and approximate shape of a person standing upright in a place where a person standing upright had no obvious reason to be. It was, he acknowledged, the kind of thing that might have been fog. The gap is known to collect ground-level mist in certain atmospheric conditions. It might have been smoke from some unseen source, or a trick of the remaining light filtering through branches at an angle that produced an illusion of form and verticality. These explanations were offered by the young man himself, not as conclusions, but as possibilities he had considered and could not dismiss and could not confirm. What made it difficult was the stillness. Fog moves, smoke disperses. The gray form did not move. For several minutes, the young man estimated perhaps 3, perhaps 5. He acknowledged that his sense of time that night was unreliable. The three of them stood on the tracks and looked at the shape on the bank, and the shape did not change, did not shift, did not dissipate. It simply remained at the height of a person in the trees above them. He remembered, he said, the sound of his own heartbeat during those minutes. He remembered the cold coming up through his shoes from the rail ties. He remembered that none of the three of them spoke. Language had become, in that moment, unnecessary. What needed to be communicated between them was communicated without words, in the shared language of people who have seen the same thing and reached the same uncertain conclusion. Eventually, they moved. There was no plan, no decision made aloud. There was simply a moment when remaining still became less possible than moving forward, and they began to walk, past the form, past the bank where it stood. Past the place in the tree line from which it had not moved, they were perhaps 20 yards beyond it when it came down. That is the only way the young man has ever described it. Not that it walked, not that it descended, that it came down, from the bank to the tracks. The movement, as he experienced it in peripheral vision, and then in the rapid backward glance that followed, was not the movement of a person navigating a slope. It did not pick its way down. It did not slip or stumble. It arrived on the tracks the way a stone arrives at the bottom of a drop, suddenly present in a new position. The intermediate steps, either absent or too fast to register, they ran a short distance, then stopped and looked back. Because the impulse to look back was stronger than the impulse to keep running, and because some part of all three of them needed to know whether the thing was following. It was standing on the tracks, in the place where they had just been. And it was, the young man said, simply standing. not advancing, not retreating, standing the way something stands when it is watching, when it is taking stock, when it is in no particular hurry. Then, slowly, it began to move away from them. Back in the direction from which they had come westward, deeper into the gap, away from the lights of Oak Hill and toward the long, empty miles of the Paint Creek Valley, it moved along the tracks. It grew smaller in the dimness, and then it was gone, swallowed by the darkness at the far end of the gap where the rail line curves slightly and the tree line closes in on both sides. There was a pause. A silence that felt, the young man said, like held breath not his own, but the silence itself, as though the hollow and the trees and the dark between them were all waiting for something. And then came the sound. He has described it multiple times in multiple settings, and his description has never varied in its essential quality. It was the sound of a man crying out in horror. Not pain, he has always been careful to say, not injury, horror. The distinction matters to him, and he has insisted on it each time. There is a sound a person makes when they are hurt, and there is a sound a person makes when they see something that undoes them, and these are not the same sound. What came out of the dark at the western end of Silver Gap was the latter. After that, they ran, all the way back, without stopping, without looking back again, without speaking, until the lights near Round Hill Road came into view, and the familiar geometry of streets and houses reassembled itself around them, and they were, once again, in the world they recognized. Investigators never confirmed any incident at Silver Gap on the night in question. The Fayette County Sheriff's Office has no record of a report filed by the three young people or their families. This is not surprising. In rural communities, particularly those in which the railroad corridor carries an informal status as outside the usual zones of adult supervision, unusual experiences along the tracks are rarely reported through official channels. The expectation of being believed is low. The expectation of consequence is high. What is perhaps more notable is that this was not the only account associated with that particular stretch of track. Archived notes from a regional folklore collection compiled in the Axet-Taco 1 early 1990s include a brief reference to Silver Gap in the context of what the collector described as persistent local avoidance. The notation is elliptical. As such, notations often are, but it records an interview with an unnamed elderly resident of Oak Hill who stated that people had always known not to walk the gap at night and that this knowledge predated any specific incident she was aware of. It was, she said, simply understood. The way certain pools in a river are understood to be deep without anyone having to measure them. A separate account, collected informally by a local historian in 2003 and preserved in a personal archive that was later donated to the Fayette County Library System, describes an experience from approximately 15 years prior to that collection date, placing it in the late 1980s. The account comes from a man who worked at the time as a track inspector for the rail line, whose responsibilities included walking sections of the corridor on a rotating schedule to check for damage to the ties, the rails, and the ballast following heavy rain or reported vibration anomalies. He was, by training and by temperament, a practical man. His account is short and given, according to the historian's notes, with the obvious reluctance of someone who has never quite decided whether to believe his own memory. He had been walking the Silver Gap section on a morning in early November, he said. Overcast. Ground fog in the low areas. He was alone, as he often was, moving westward through the gap on his inspection route. About midway through the cut, at the point where the bank on the right side rises most steeply before leveling off into the ridge, he became aware that someone was watching him from the trees. He did not see anyone. He did not hear anyone. He simply became aware. He described it as the sensation of a gaze specific, directed, sustained. He stopped walking. He looked at the bank. He saw nothing. The fog was low and the light was flat, and the trees were simply trees. He stood there for what he estimated as several minutes. The sensation did not diminish. If anything, it intensified. He described a quality to it that he found difficult to articulate, not threatening, precisely, but absolute, total. The feeling of being seen by something that was seeing him completely, in a way that ordinary observation does not approach. He said it was the most uncomfortable he had ever felt in his body while nothing was visibly happening. Eventually, he continued on his route, he completed his inspection, he filed his report. He marked nothing unusual in the official log. State records from the rail company's internal safety documentation for that period are no longer publicly available, having been transferred to a regional archive following a corporate reorganization in 2001. Attempts to access individual inspection reports from the late 1980s through formal records requests have been met with notifications that the relevant files were damaged during the transfer and are not retrievable in their possible original form. There is one more account that bears mention, though it is the most fragmentary and the least verifiable. It was shared not in any formal collection context, but in conversation specifically, in the kind of conversation that happens late at night in small towns when people who have lived in a place long enough to know its silences begin to speak to one another about things they do not ordinarily discuss. It concerns a man whose name is given only as Gerald in the source conversation, and who was described as having lived on the far western side of the Gap, closer to the Paint Creek Valley, in a house that no longer exists. The house appears on tax records from the 1940s and 50s, and then simply does not appear on subsequent assessments, the absence unremarked and unexplained. Gerald, according to this account, was found one morning on the tracks near Silver Gap by a neighbor who had come looking for him after he failed to appear at a meeting of some kind. The specifics are unclear. He was standing on the railroad ties. He was facing westward. He was alive and physically unharmed. He did not respond when spoken to for a period of time that the neighbor estimated at several minutes. When he finally did respond, he appeared confused about where he was and how he had gotten there. He had no memory, he said, of coming to the tracks. He had no memory of the night before after a certain point in the evening. He continued to live on the western side of the Gap for some months after that. Then he did not. Whether he moved away or whether something else accounts for his absence from subsequent records, no one in the source conversation could say with certainty. His name does not appear in Fayette County records after 1957. It would be easy, and perhaps natural, to draw lines between these accounts, to suggest that they describe the same thing, encountered by different people across different decades, to propose that Silver Gap harbors something, some presence, some residue, some quality of place that acts upon human beings in particular ways at particular hours. That suggestion is available. It has been made in various forms by those who have reason to make it, but the honest position is one of uncertainty. Rural corridors collect strange accounts, the way river bends collect debris, not because something is necessarily there, but because the conditions are right for accumulation. Isolation amplifies perception. Darkness transforms the familiar into the unfamiliar. The mind, in the absence of clear information, produces its own. None of this is remarkable. None of this requires explanation beyond the ordinary strangeness of human consciousness navigating environments in which it did not evolve. What the young man saw at Silver Gap, what he heard at the far end of that hollow on an autumn night, that cry that came out of the darkness like something being torn from the world, he has never claimed to know what it was. He has said repeatedly that he saw something, that something moved, that something stood on the tracks and watched them and then walked away and then made a sound that has followed him through the years in the particular way that sounds follow people when they carry the specific quality of being wrong. Not loud, not violent, just wrong. In the way that certain things are wrong when they occur in places and at moments when they should not be able to occur at all. He has walked a great many miles in his life since that night. He has, by his own account, never walked that stretch of tracks again. He does not return to Silver Gap. He does not have a clear reason that he can articulate for this choice, only that it is a choice he finds very easy to maintain. The tracks are still there, the gap is still there, the ridge rises on both sides in the same way it has always risen, and the trees on the western bank are the same trees, grown taller and denser over the decades. On clear days, it is unremarkable. A notch in a ridge, a utility corridor, a name on an old map, on certain evenings, when the light has faded to that blue-gray dimness, and the fog comes in low from the creek valleys, and the temperature drops, and the world along the tracks becomes very quiet on those evenings, something about the place resists description. Whether that resistance belongs to the place or to the people who know its history is a question that does not resolve itself cleanly. It is perhaps enough to say this: there are places that accumulate something. Not necessarily the supernatural, not necessarily the paranormal, something subtler than that and perhaps more durable. The weight of attention paid to a location over time, the residue of fear, the way a spot of ground absorbs the quality of what has happened there, or what people have believed has happened there, until the ground itself carries a kind of charge, faint, ambient, impossible to measure, and yet unmistakably present to those who pass through it in the right conditions. Silver Gap may be such a place. The young man who walked through it that autumn night when he was 15 and the world was still mostly made of things he understood would not dispute that possibility. He has thought about it for many years. He has no conclusion to offer. He has only the memory of a gray form standing at the height of a person in the trees above the tracks, and the sound that came after, and the long run home through the dark toward the lights he could see distantly over Round Hill Road. He reached those lights. He was safe. He has been safe every day since. He does not know what the gray thing was. He does not know what it heard, or saw, or was doing in that hollow in the last hour before full dark. He does not know why it cried out. And somewhere to the west of Oak Hill, on the far side of the ridge where no one lives for miles, the tracks run on through the trees, and Silver Gap holds its particular silence. And whatever it is that has always been known without anyone having to explain it, the way certain pools in a river are known to be deep, goes on being known quietly by those who have reason to know it.
Art, a bustling intersection by day, a shimmering network of light after dusk, and beyond that, the distant, inky blackness of the river. I'd moved there for the view, for the feeling of being part of something vast, yet isolated enough to find peace. It was perfect for me, a graphic designer who lived and breathed urban energy, but yearned for quiet when the day was done. For the first few months, the view was a constant source of comfort and inspiration. I'd often find myself staring out, a mug of tea warming my hands, watching the city slowly quiet down. The night was a tapestry of distant headlights, blinking tower lights, and the occasional mournful wail of a distant siren. I usually went to bed by 11, my sleep deep and uninterrupted, a luxury I hadn't truly appreciated until now. The unease began subtly. So subtly I almost convinced myself it was a product of my own tired mind. It started with my reflection. Sometimes, when the room behind me was dark and the city lights painted the glass, I'd see a fleeting distortion in my own image. A shadow within a shadow, a stretch of darkness that didn't quite belong. I'd blink, and it would vanish, leaving only my tired face staring back. Just a trick of the light, I'd tell myself. The glass of these old windows isn't perfectly flat. Then, there was the timing. I'm not usually one to check the clock in the middle of the night, but a persistent feeling, a subtle prickle of my skin, would often wake me. And each time, my eyes would invariably drift to the digital clock on my bedside table, its red numbers glowing like a tiny, watchful eye. It was always, unfailingly, 3:12 a.m. The precision of it was unsettling. It felt like an appointment I didn't know I had. I started to dread that hour. As midnight approached, a knot of anxiety would tighten in my stomach. I'd pull the blinds down, thick blackout blinds that I'd installed myself, hoping to seal off the night to keep the outside out, but the feeling persisted. I'd lie awake, rigid, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant drone of the city, and the frantic thump of my own heart. The very air in the room seemed to thicken, heavy with unspoken anticipation. One particularly cold Tuesday night, exhaustion finally won. I must have dozed off, because I woke with a jolt, a sudden, breathless gasp that tore through the silence. My eyes snapped open, immediately darting to the clock. 3:12 a.m. A shiver ran down my spine, cold and immediate. My gaze, against my will, was drawn to the window. The blackout blinds were still down, seemingly secure, but a tiny sliver of light, almost invisible, leaked from the bottom corner where they didn't quite meet the sill, and in that sliver, a shape. It wasn't a shadow this time. It was a distortion in the darkness, a deeper shade of black that seemed to hover just beyond the glass. It was indistinct, formless, yet I felt its presence with an intensity that stole my breath. It was as if the night itself had condensed into a singular, observant mass, focused entirely on my window, on my apartment, on me. My heart pounded, a frantic drum against my ribs, threatening to burst. I squeezed my eyes shut, a desperate, childish plea for it to vanish, for the world to return to normal. When I opened them again, it was gone. Only the faint, ambient glow of the city filtering through the tiny gap remained, a mocking reminder of what I had seen. I spent the rest of the night huddled in bed, blankets pulled up to my chin, my mind racing, trying to find any rational explanation. It was just a trick of the light, I told myself. My overactive imagination, fueled by too much caffeine and not enough sleep, perhaps a touch of lingering stress. But the terror was too real, too visceral, a cold, hard stone in my gut. The incidents escalated. The blinds, no matter how tightly I drew them, no matter how many clips I used, seemed to have a will of their own. I'd wake at 3:12 a.m. to find them subtly shifted, a new gap appearing, just large enough for a sliver of the outside to creep in. Sometimes it was a tiny crack at the top, like an eyelid opening. Other times, a wider opening near the middle, perfectly framing a section of the dark park below or a distant building. Each time, I'd reseal them with trembling hands, my dread growing exponentially, feeding on my dwindling sense of security. Then came the tapping. Faint at first, a soft, insistent tap-tap-tap against the window pane right at the level of my bed, just beyond the glass. It was rhythmic, almost playful, yet utterly terrifying in its implication. It only occurred after 3:12 a.m., once I was fully awake and staring at the clock, my heart racing. If I moved, it stopped. If I closed my eyes, I could still feel the subtle vibration of it through the wall, through the very air, a ghostly percussion. It knew, it absolutely knew I was awake, and it reveled in its knowledge. I started leaving the lights on, bright, harsh lights that chased away the shadows, but the tapping persisted, a silent defiance of the artificial glare, a high-pitched sound cutting through the electric hum. I'd try to drown it out with music, loud, pulsating beats, but the sound seemed to cut through everything, a high-frequency intrusion into my sanity, a tiny pinprick through the fabric of my reality. My sleep became almost non-existent. My days were a blur of fatigue and anxiety, punctuated by the growing dread of midnight's approach, a countdown to another terrifying encounter. My work began to suffer. My designs lacked inspiration. My focus was shattered. My friends noticed. "Emily, you look terrible," my best friend Sarah said over coffee, her eyes filled with genuine concern. "What's going on? You're never like this." I mumbled something about a demanding project, about the city noise, about the pressures of a busy life. How could I explain that my window, my beautiful view, had become a portal for something unnameable, something that was systematically stripping me of my peace, my sanity? One particularly humid Wednesday night, I had taken every precaution. The blinds were triple-checked, taped down at the edges for good measure with industrial-strength tape. Every light in the apartment was on, burning brightly, creating a fortress of artificial illumination. I was trying to work, to distract myself, to prove that I was still in control, but my gaze kept straying to the window, to the impenetrable barrier of the blinds, a wall between me and whatever lurked beyond. Midnight passed. 1 a.m. 2 a.m. A fragile hope began to bloom in my chest, a desperate, foolish whisper of optimism. Maybe tonight. Maybe it would finally stop. Maybe it had given up. Then, at precisely 3:00 a.m., the lights flickered. Not just a dimming, but a rapid, almost frantic strobe, plunging the room into momentary darkness, then harsh light, then darkness again, a chaotic, disorienting dance. My breath caught in my throat, a choked gasp. I stared at the main light switch, expecting it to be faulty, but it was solid, unmoving. The flickering intensified, a chaotic dance that made the shadows writhe, grow, and shrink in terrifying rhythm. My eyes, involuntarily, were drawn back to the window, a magnetic pull I couldn't resist. The blackout blinds, despite being taped, despite every precaution, were now open, not shifted, not askew. They were pulled apart, forming a perfect, symmetrical rectangle like a carefully chosen frame, and in that frame, at precisely 3:12 a.m., I saw it. A face. It was pale, almost translucent, luminous against the profound darkness of the park, an impossible beacon of horror. It was elongated, impossibly thin, with hollow, sunken cheeks and a jawline that seemed to stretch unnaturally, dislocated from any human form. The skin was smooth, featureless, like old porcelain, or perhaps the surface of an ancient petrified egg, but for two enormous, perfectly round black eyes that absorbed all light, all hope, all joy. They were unblinking, unfeeling, ancient, an abyss of indifference, and they were fixed directly on me, a gaze that pierced through my very being, stripping me bare. It wasn't outside. Not exactly. It was pressed against the glass, but not on it. It was within the glass, or perhaps the glass itself had become its medium, its terrifying canvas. Its features seemed to ripple and distort with the faint reflections of my brightly lit apartment, the harsh overhead glare illuminating its horrifying stillness, as if it were a part of the window, a terrible, living stain, a malignant growth. And then, as I stared, paralyzed by a terror that stole my very voice, freezing the scream in my throat, its mouth opened. It wasn't a human mouth. It was a perfect, seamless black circle, like a void, a bottomless pit of hunger, and from it, a faint, wet slurp echoed, a sound that seemed to come from inside my own skull, a sound of sickening, insatiable hunger, a sound that promised to consume. I screamed. A raw, guttural sound that tore from my throat, shattering the silence of the night, shattering my own sanity into a million irreparable pieces. I stumbled backward, tripping over my chair, sending it crashing to the floor with a deafening clatter. My eyes remained fixed on that face, that impossible, indifferent face, until my vision blurred with tears of terror, hot and stinging. It blinked slowly, once, its black eye expanding and contracting like a grotesque pupil. Then another wet slurp echoed as the features seemed to melt back into the glass, receding, dissolving, and the perfect rectangle of the blinds slowly, impossibly drawing themselves shut, sealing off the horror, but not the memory. I fled the apartment that night. I didn't pack. I didn't even grab my phone. I just ran. Down the 3 flights of stairs, out into the deserted street, my bare feet slapping against the cold pavement, my lungs burning, screaming for air. I didn't stop until I reached Sarah's apartment, bursting through her door, incoherent with terror, pointing wildly at my own reflection in her hallway mirror, as if the face had followed me there, as if it could emerge from any reflective surface. Now I live in a different city, hundreds of miles away, in a ground-floor apartment with no windows that face anything but a solid brick wall. I keep the blinds permanently drawn, heavy, opaque barriers that provide a semblance of security. And I have a pathological fear of glass, especially old reflective panes, avoiding storefronts, mirrors, anything that might offer a glimpse into the other side. I sleep with a dozen lights on, every single one blazing brightly, and I never ever turn them off, not even for a second. The sound of traffic, of sirens, of human voices, is a constant necessary balm, a cacophony that drowns out the quiet whispers of memory, the echoes of that terrible hour. But sometimes, when I'm alone, and the city finally quiets down to a low, distant drone, and the hands of the clock creep past midnight, I hear it. A faint, distant tap, 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 no longer coming from a window, but seeming to emanate from the very air around me. A soft, wet slurp that makes me gag. And the chilling, undeniable sensation of a pale, unblinking face staring at me, through the brick, through the drywall, through my very soul, waiting for the precise moment of 3:12 a.m. Because some things aren't meant to be seen. And some things, once they see you, never forget, never truly let go. Every night at 3:33 a.m., the same knock returned. The first time it happened, I was half asleep on a borrowed mattress in a bungalow on Ashbury Avenue, the kind of place you rent because it looks honest from the curb. Haddon, Ohio rolls up early, but the neighborhood still hums at night, freight on the river bridge, a dog testing its courage, the soft pulse of a distant train horn. My phone glowed 3:33 a.m. on the nightstand. The digit repetition snagged my attention. That's when the knock came. 3 taps, not loud, knuckles on hollow wood. From the front door, I held my breath like a kid hiding under a blanket. Another 3 taps, the same spacing, the same careful touch. I waited for a voice to follow. Wrong address. Sorry, car trouble, something human. The house gave me nothing. After a minute, the refrigerator kicked on and the AC exhaled, like the rooms had made a decision to ignore it. In the morning, I checked the porch. Dew on the rail, a menu from the pizza place wedged under the mat that hadn't been there the night before, no footprints. I told myself it had to be a drunk neighbor. Or the wind. Or a branch. I told myself a lot of things, because that's what you do when you don't want the simplest version, a stranger at your door at 3:33 a.m. Night 2, I double-locked the deadbolt and slid the chain. I moved the shoe rack and leaned a chair against the knob. At 3:33, the same 3 taps. The chair whispered an inch on the hardwood. Something in my spine did the same. I kept perfectly still. The knock didn't come again. Night 3. I decided to be brave. When 3:33 hit, I slid out of bed and walked to the door as quietly as the floorboards let me. My heart was too loud for the room. I pressed my eye to the peephole. The porch lamp was off. The streetlight across the way made the yard look like a stage no one had set. I cupped a hand, called out, "You okay?" Silence. I waited. Then, without thinking why, I knocked 3 times on my side of the door. Light. Exact. Just to prove there was nothing to be afraid of. The reply came from the other side. 3 taps, the same spacing, the same weight, like a recording of my knuckles played back to me a beat late. I stepped backwards so fast, my heel hit the baseboard. The chain rattled. A dog barked down the block and didn't know what it was unhappy about. When my breath found me, I said to no one, "Don't do that again." The door didn't answer. On the 4th night, I didn't wait. At midnight, I slept in my old sweatshirt with my keys in my pocket, like a person ready to run. I told myself I wouldn't get up if I heard it. At 3:33, 3 taps. The same return knock. I lay there and counted my pulse until my body stopped trying to sprint while horizontal. On the 5th day, I met Mrs. Dwyer, my landlord, in her kitchen 2 doors down. She slid a lease addendum across the laminate and asked if everything felt in order. I mentioned the late-night knocks like a joke. Her face did a quick flicker there, then gone. "Kids," she said, stirring sugar into coffee she didn't need. "Sometimes you get a group that thinks they're clever. Ding-dong ditch. It will pass." She didn't ask what time. That afternoon, at the hardware store, I bought a simple door camera and a new chain with longer screws. The guy behind the counter name tag said, "AL told me his cousin swears by motion lights. Makes people act right," he said. "Or at least go try someone else." I installed the camera before dinner, tested the feed, watched my own porch in grayscale until I felt foolish. At 3:33 a.m., the camera sent a push notification. "Motion at your door." I watched live, no one there. Then, the 3 taps. The phone speaker caught them. The waveform looked like footsteps on a flat beach. I rewound. There was a shadow a beat before the sound, a darker slice where the glass pane in my door showed the porch. It was nothing, if you wanted it to be. It was something if you didn't. The next night, I tried an experiment. At 3:32, I stood on the inside of the door and knocked a different rhythm. 2 quick, 1 slow. Tap, tap, tap. I waited. At 3:33, from the other side, came 2 quick, 1 slow. Tap, tap, tap. The same weight, the same distance between taps. Not imitation, reflection. Like my door had turned into a surface that throws back whatever it's given, a little later, from a place that doesn't belong to here. I told Maya about it at the diner on East Ferry, where I pick up the lunch shift. She listened with that tilted head she uses on sad regulars and unreliable exes. "You're gonna tell me you've been sleeping," she said, and smiled without humor. "Or you're gonna tell me hadn't got interesting." I showed her the push notifications. 3:33 exactly, 3 nights in a row, the little camera icon stamped like a dare. She handed the phone back and said, "Nobody believes witching hour stories. They believe patterns." On night 8, the knocks didn't come from the front door. They came from the bedroom closet. 3. 33 lit the screen on my phone. I was already awake, eyes on the numbers. From the closet, 3 taps. Knuckles on hollow wood. Not the frame, the hollow inside. I sat up too fast. The room teetered politely and righted itself. The closet door was closed. The light under the door, none. The smell in the room changed. Old linen, cold iron. I said no, in a voice so dry it could have been a page. The knock didn't repeat. I got up and dragged the dresser across the floor until it pressed into the closet trim and scolded the legs with a wobble. I didn't sleep again. The next morning, I found an access panel behind a loose baseboard in the hall, the thin, square paint applied like the memory of a color. It had been there the whole time. I pried it with a butter knife and felt tiny splinters argue with my fingers. Inside the wall was a shallow pocket of dust and old air and a folded envelope. The paper was soft as cloth. My name wasn't on it. The handwriting was all angles, written with a pen that had wanted to be sharper. If you knock, it will knock back. If you answer, it learns you. Do not return what it gives you. We tried everything. Moving, ignoring, praying. It knows 3. 33 because we taught it. If you must hear it, let it be the last time. Under the note was a Polaroid of my front door from years ago. Same glass, same porch rail. The timestamp was just the month and day, but the shadow in the glass was familiar. A darker slice where something stood that refused to register as a person. I stopped knocking back. Night 9, 3:30, 3 taps at the front door. I lay frozen. No reply. Night 10, 3 taps at the bedroom window. The shade breathed in and out like a sleeping animal. I did not move. Night 11, 3 taps at the bathroom door. I was awake, sitting on the edge of the tub because the hot water and the white tile felt like control. The knock came as if my house had learned which room held my attention and decided that mattered. I whispered, "You don't live here," and immediately felt ridiculous and immediately felt less alone. On night 12, I lost my temper. My father says stubbornness is a family hobby. At 3:33, when the knocks came from the hall closet, 3 taps, precise like good punctuation, I opened the door. I don't have a better explanation than this. The dark inside seemed deeper than what a closet can hold. The air was colder by a degree you could feel on your teeth. I said, "I'm not playing with you," and shut it gently, firmly. The 3rd tap landed as the latch seated on my side. Like a hand had finished the gesture for me. My stomach did a small, slow roll. After that, the knocks spread. Not louder, not faster, just more patient. The kitchen wall by the table, the headboard, the floor near the bed. Always 3. Always 3. 33. If I fell asleep on the couch, they came from the firebox. If I stayed up in the kitchen, the pantry door breathed and then remembered not to. I stopped telling people. When you talk about a thing, you feed the part of it that wants your mouth. Mrs. Dwyer texted me one afternoon, asking if everything was still settled. The word choice made me feel like a lake. I wrote back, "All good," then typed, "Did the last tenant knock?" then deleted it. Later, in the yard, she mentioned a man named Holland who had lived there decades earlier. "He worked nights at the river plant," she said, tying up tomato vines with her bracelets chiming. Wrote notes to himself, the kind of man who keeps a schedule like a religion. After he passed, the house still felt timely. That make sense? I said yes because I didn't know what else to do. I put down rugs, I added a second chain, I wedged felt between hinge and jamb so the doors would have to commit to moving. I told myself it was just a habit in the bones of a building, like light through old glass making rainbows you didn't ask for. I told myself a lot of things. On night 19 at 3:33, the porch camera finally saw a shape. Not a face, a gap. A place where the image failed briefly, person-shaped in front of the glass. The knocks came, soft on the inside of the door, as if the house had turned itself around when I wasn't looking. I watched live on my phone and felt the floor under my feet like a boat. Then, this is important, I did nothing. I didn't approach, I didn't speak, I let the minute roll over me like a small wave and die on the shore. The shape evaporated across the pixels. The knocks didn't stop after that, but they weakened. 3 soft taps, like a memory of knuckles. A week later, 2 taps. Then, silence. I slept 7 hours in a row and woke with tears in my eyes, embarrassed and grateful and angry that my body had played the role of courtroom witness for so long. On the first quiet night, at 3:33, the ice maker snapped and dropped cubes, and I laughed too hard for the hour. I told the empty room, "That's more like it." The room, in return, did nothing. It felt like a victory. There's an odd thing you don't expect. When the knocking stopped, I missed the certainty of it. Terror is terrible, but predictability gives you something to push against. In the new quiet, my mind tried to invent taps where there were none. I would hear a truck hit the seam on Ashbury, and my heart would sprint. I would tap the counter with my fingertip without meaning to, and hold my breath waiting for the reply that didn't come. Months later, on a storm night, thunder sat on the roof and rattled the dishes, and I woke 3:33 on the phone to 3 knocks. Not the door, not the walls, the headboard. Soft. Familiar, I put my palm flat on the wood and said, "I don't return knocks anymore." The 4th tap never came. I still live on Ashbury. The porch camera sends me motion alerts when a raccoon with too much confidence decides to argue with the trash lid. The Friday night crowd stumbles past around midnight when the bowling alley closes. I sleep with the door chained and the hallway light off. Sometimes I take out the envelope from the wall and read the note I didn't want to believe. Sometimes I imagine the man who wrote it sitting in the same kitchen chair, deciding which version of his life to feed. People ask if I ever figured it out. I don't tell them about the recording of my own knock coming back through a door that forgot what side it was. I say the house was settling. I say the camera was glitchy. I say I was tired. Those are all true in their way. This is also true. If you knock, something will decide that you owe it the knock back. If you answer, it learns you. If you stop, eventually, it goes looking for someone who still believes doors are just doors. And when the night leans on the porch rail and tests its weight at 3:33, I keep still, let it knock, let the minute pass, and let the house return to the business of being a place where a person can finally sleep. The face in the mirror moved before she did. The first time the face in the bathroom mirror moved before she did, it was 12:11 a.m. In a 3rd-floor walk-up over a thrift store on Maple and 6th, where delivery trucks made the sidewalk tremble before dawn and a soda machine coughed coins at odd hours, Evelyn Cross had left the light above the sink on low so the apartment wouldn't feel like an empty theater. She woke thirsty, padded in with the kind of steps you take in someone else's house even when it's yours, and reached for the glass turned upside down by the faucet. In the mirror, Evelyn's reflection lifted her hand, and then Evelyn followed. It was small, a beat out of order, like a dubbed movie, with the sound just wrong enough to itch. She froze. The bulb hummed. The old fan in the window ticked twice. She tilted her head left and watched her reflection tilt first by a fraction, landing a breath before her. A joke, she told herself. Fatigue. The kind of trick your brain plays when it thinks it's smarter than your eyes. She waited, counted to 5, then shut the light and went back to bed. At 2:03, she was still awake, listening to the downstairs cooler humming in the thrift store and the freight train that stitched the south edge of town together, thinking about how odd it is when something familiar becomes slightly misfiled. Morning tried to make sense of things. It was rent day, and Mrs. Wynne from the thrift store was already outside, tapping a cigarette into a paper cup at 8:02. A woman who had chosen floral cardigans as a uniform and never looked back. Evelyn carried an envelope and a smile. "You getting settled?" Mrs. Wynne asked without looking up. "Bathroom light flickers? 3rd floor's got a mind of its own." "It's fine," Evelyn said, because the word fine is how you ask a room to behave without admitting you're asking. On the way back up, she paused by the display in the front window. Yesterday's haul had been arranged into an accidental altar. A varsity jacket that smelled like gym air, 3 porcelain birds, a stack of Reader's Digests that would never be read again, and a full-length mirror in a wooden frame with a thin nick like a healed scar along the left side. The price tag said $25 in green marker. She caught her reflection in it, crooked ponytail, dark circles, then the fluorescent inside buzzed, and her reflection looked at her a breath before she looked at it. She told herself she'd imagined it. She paid anyway. The guy from the back, Marcus, easy smile, forearms like he moved furniture for sport, carried it upstairs because the stairs were narrow and gravity, here felt like a suggestion. He propped it against the bedroom wall. Found it in an estate lot, he said, dusting his hands. House up on Miller Ridge, people with money and ugly wallpaper. You want me to anchor it? I'll manage, she said, because the need to be capable is a hard thing to put down. That night, she brushed her teeth, watching herself like a witness. The man, 56 p.m. The mirror paid attention. She lifted the toothbrush, the other hand lifted first. She shook her head. The reflection argued with a slight no before she could get hers out. When she leaned closer, her reflection didn't. It waited, and when she was almost close enough to fog the glass, the face in it smiled. Evelyn did not. She slept with the bathroom door shut and a towel under the crack, because that's what the body does when the brain is short on good ideas. Tuesday, she met Raina from 3B in the laundry room, the kind of neighbor whose whole personality fit inside the phrase, "I hate this dryer." Evelyn almost told her about the mirror, got as far as, "Do you ever feel like?" and then shook a knot out of a pillowcase instead. Raina checked her phone. "This building's haunted by the guy who used to own the bakery," she said. "Diesel coffee breath. You'll know if he likes you, your bread rises. If he doesn't." She made a flat gesture with her palm. "My muffins died yesterday." Evelyn laughed, relieved to borrow someone else's story. She did not bake. She ate grocery store sushi over the sink and told herself she was too tired to be nervous. Wednesday at 12:28 a.m. The mirror found a new trick. She stood in the bathroom doorway, made a fist, and held still. In the glass, her reflection opened its hand, and then Evelyn's fingers followed, obedient as a student. She tried to catch it by being quick. A snap, a clap, a sudden lean. The figure in the mirror anticipated each move by the smallest breath, an unsteady metronome that thought she wouldn't notice. She took a photo on her phone. The image looked normal, as if photographs were loyal and mirrors were not. She turned on the shower and watched steam climb the corners of the glass. When she wiped a circle with her palm, the reflection wiped clean a beat before she did. Then impossible letters formed in the fog from the mirror side, someone else's finger dragging through condensation with a slow deliberateness that made her stomach drop. Don't turn off the light. She left the bathroom light on and did not sleep. Thursday, she pulled the mirror off the bedroom wall, turned it face down on a blanket, and went to work at the community clinic where she filed forms for people who never got a straight answer anywhere else. She told herself she was silly. She told herself she was fine. She told herself she would take the mirror back to the thrift store and get her 25 and buy groceries with it. After dinner, she propped it up again because something in her needed to see what it would do. At 1:17 a.m., sitting on the edge of the bed, she raised her right hand. The glass raised its right hand first. She said hello to an empty room and heard from behind the glass the faintest exhale, like someone on the other side had tried to say it with her and missed the timing. At 2, 3, the fluorescent in the bathroom buzzed and stuttered out. Darkness poured across the tiles. In the mirror, only in the mirror, the bathroom stayed lit. Her reflection stood under a light that didn't exist. Eyes wide, mouth shaping a word. Not help, not run. Something longer. Then the bulb flared back, and the image snapped into sync like nothing had been caged behind the glass at all. Friday was delivery day at the thrift store. Evelyn went down to ask Mrs. Wynne where the estate came from, as if anyone ever gets an answer that makes them happy. That mirror? Mrs. Wynne squinted at a clipboard. Miller Ridge lot, like Marcus said. Older couple, daughter in from Phoenix, sold the whole house in 2 days. The woman, what was her name? She wasn't well. She tapped the paper as if it would remember for her. They had mirrored closets everywhere. Gave me the creeps. Evelyn found Marcus unpacking lamps from a banana box. The mirror? Anything weird when you brought it up? Weird, like it was heavy, he said, smiling. I don't look at mirrors at night. Bad policy. Why? No reason. She lied. That night, she placed a strip of blue painter's tape across the edge of the mirror and the wall half on glass, half on paint. If the mirror slid, the tape would tear. At 12:41 a.m. The tape tore in a perfect line. The mirror hadn't moved. Her reflection raised a hand. Evelyn didn't. She angled her phone toward the glass and switched to video. The screen showed her face, and, one breath before it, another. She backed away, heart pounding in the way that belongs to children and certain animals. The recording captured a tiny flicker at the corner of the frame, as if a shoulder had leaned out and leaned back, and when she played it again in the morning, the flicker was gone, as if the file had adopted the store policy of not looking at mirrors at night. Saturday, she bought a new bulb for the bathroom, a heavy frosted globe that promised calm. She bought batteries for the flashlight because she wanted to be the kind of person who owned batteries. She bought command strips and anchored the mirror so it would not be tempted by movement. At 11:58, she texted her mother and deleted, "I think something is wrong," and typed, "love you" instead. At 1:03, the building settled. At 1:11, a truck on 6th took the light too fast and made the window shade thrum. At 1:27, the mirror's face broke into a smile that did not reach the eyes, and Evelyn's mouth stayed still. The person in the glass lifted a finger and slowly, gently made the shape of a no. Evelyn turned her head, because if someone tells you not to look, you look. Behind her, in the dark of the doorway, something stood just outside the bathroom's bloom of light. Tall enough to own the top half of the frame, still enough to be an idea. She didn't scream because her scream was a small animal that had hidden in her ribs and wouldn't be coaxed out. She stared at the mirror instead. Her reflection stared back. The shape in the doorway did not step forward. When the clock slid over to 1:30, the hallway remembered itself, just scuffed paint, the taste of dust, a shadow that knew how to behave. "Don't turn off the light," the mirror had told her. She left it on. Sunday, she stayed out late at a diner on Pine Street where the coffee tastes like hope and the pancakes are a little too sweet. The late shift server knew her name without asking and refilled her cup without comment. Outside, the crosswalk button stuck on walk, and the street sounded like a weather report for tires. When she climbed the stairs, the building felt like a person who'd been holding a breath and let it out when they heard her at the door. She brushed her teeth with the light on. She held up her left hand, then her right. In the mirror, the motion came first, like a teacher with a lesson, and then hers trailed, learning. She pulled a stool from the kitchen and sat in front of the mirror with a notebook and wrote down times like she was a scientist and not someone trying to convince herself she could be believed. 12. 7 reflection leads by a beat. 1. 27 doorframe shadow. 2. 3 bathroom bulb lies. 2. 44 silence like a thought. She wrote until the letters stopped looking like English. At 3:12, the face in the mirror mouthed her name. It was clear this time. Evelyn. She drew closer. The glass breathed cold into her skin. "What do you want?" she whispered. The face in the mirror frowned, lifted both hands, and pressed its palms flat to the inside of the glass. Evelyn matched it. The chill slid into her fingers like water. The reflection shook its head again. Soft, urgent, then glanced toward the doorway with a look that did not belong to glass at all. She turned. Nobody, just the hallway and the distant cooler downstairs pretending it was an ocean. She turned back. The mirror was empty, just the room, the door, the blank rectangle where a person ought to be. Then her own face arrived, a fraction late, as if she had climbed into it. Monday morning, she took the mirror off the wall. She laid it face down, fixed a towel over it with tape, and leaned it behind the dresser like a secret you promised to keep. The apartment breathed easier. For a day, the faucets sang properly, the fridge kept time, the stairwell smelled like hand soap and dryer sheets. Relief sat in her chair and put its feet on the coffee table. At 1:54 a.m., the towel fell off. She didn't see it happen. She woke because the room had changed temperature, and that's a thing bodies notice after enough nights. She walked into the bedroom and saw the mirror uncovered, leaned at the angle she'd left it. In it, only in it, the bathroom light was on. She did what the fog letters had told her. Do not turn off the light. She turned it on in the actual bathroom, and the mirror's image synced obediently. She brought the stool back and sat. "Who are you?" she asked, feeling ridiculous and also like she owed someone the question, "What are you?" The face in the mirror looked like hers and did not. The left eyebrow held a thin, pale mark that hadn't been on her face the last time she checked. The hair fell in the same clumsy ponytail, but with one strand tucked behind an ear in a way she never did. The reflection's mouth shaped a word again. This time, she understood it. Stay. From what? She asked, voice too loud, as if tone could be a lock. The mirror glanced not at the doorway this time, but at the dark square of the hallway where her front door sat. 3 beats later, someone knocked. Not the polite UPS rhythm, not the friendly neighbor double tap. 3 slow, measured knocks with space between them. Evelyn stood there, hand on her throat like she'd forgotten where her voice lived. The face in the mirror lifted both hands. Again, don't, and Evelyn did not move. The knocking came again, 3 times, then stopped. Under the door, a shadow lengthened, stood, turned, and went. In the morning, Mrs. Wynne mentioned it while counting the till. We had a break-in on 8th last week. Guy tested doors till he found one stupid enough. You keep your chain on, sweetheart. I do, Evelyn said. She did. Now she did. She started leaving the bathroom light on at night. The bill went up. She didn't care. She slept better when the mirror could keep its end of whatever bargain had been offered. She rearranged her room so the mirror faced the hall and angled so she could see the front door's edge in the glass if she needed to. She started setting the chain even when she went down to toss trash and back. Little rules, little lines you don't cross. 2 quiet nights, then the mirror grew impatient with quiet. At 12:23, the reflection lifted its hands and spelled something in the fog that wasn't there. She had to stand on tiptoe to see. Lock closet, it wrote, and when she opened the hall closet, the scent hit her wet wool, something metallic, a draft that had no business existing in a closet. She shut it. She pushed a chair under the handle. The chair vibrated once and stopped, like an idea someone had decided against. She hung a little brass bell from a nail above the frame, so the air would have to ask permission. By Thursday, Evelyn had almost forgiven the mirror for being what it was. She left the light on, set her phone on the dresser, and fell asleep at 10:41, like regular people in regular apartments. At 1:08, she woke to the sound of her name spoken by her own voice from the bathroom doorway. She looked at the mirror. The reflection looked back and did not move its mouth. The voice came again, her voice closer, just to the left of the frame. Evelyn didn't turn. The reflection lifted its hands to the glass, pleading, and shook its head no, 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 with the determination of someone who has lost an argument before and intends not to lose it again. The voice faded. A car outside found a gear. The building remembered how to be a building. The next afternoon, she went back to the thrift store with the mirror in mind and asked Marcus what the Miller Ridge house had been like, because sometimes you want a floor plan for your fear. He shrugged. Clean, cold, a lot of mirrors. They said the lady sang to them at night. The daughter said it made her dad nuts, like she wasn't singing to him. Did the lady Evelyn stopped, not sure what she was planning to ask? Did anything happen there? Nothing the papers wanted, Marcus said. That's the worst kind. On her way back upstairs, she detoured. Curiosity came dressed as caution. She drove to Miller Ridge, where the houses sit back from the road as if money had taught them posture. The one from the lot was easy to spot fresh paint trying to forget old wallpaper. A for sale sign leaned in the yard like it had nowhere else to be. A contractor's van idled in the drive. Through the window, she saw a room with an oriental rug like the one she'd glimpsed in the glass, and a wall where a mirror had once been the rectangle of cleaner paint, the only proof. She didn't knock. She stood on the sidewalk and listened. No singing, only a leaf blower somewhere behind the pines and the vague electric hum of places that have been emptied and are trying not to echo. On the curb, someone had left a box marked linens. She didn't touch it. She went home. Friday, 3 a.m. The mirror broke its own rule. The reflection moved late. Evelyn lifted her hand and the glass followed, slow, as if the person in it were tired or sad. She felt something like grief in the room and had no idea whose it was. She pressed her palm to the glass. The mirror palm met it. The cold was not as sharp. Then the bulb blew with the sound of a soft snap, and the bathroom went black. The mirror showed the room still lit. In the impossible light, the reflection turned its head toward the doorway, slow as a clock. A figure crossed behind Evelyn in the mirror, tall, wrong-proportioned, as if someone had folded a person and smoothed them back out. The reflection did not scream. It did not run. It stepped forward in the frame so that it filled the glass, blocking the view of the doorway, and shook its head hard enough to scatter the hair from the ponytail. Evelyn did not move. She could smell wool and cold pennies. She counted because sometimes counting is what you have left. At 30, the bulb above the sink flickered to life with a guilty glow. The doorway was empty. The hall, a hall. The next day, Evelyn bought a pack of bulbs, 3 more chains, and a small hammer. She added a chain to the closet door because absurdity had become a kind of professionalism. She hammered the nail for the bell deeper so the building would have to work to lie. She brought the mirror closer to the bathroom so the 2 rectangles of light could talk to each other if they needed to. That night, the mirror's face looked wrecked, in the way faces do when they've done too much of whatever they are for the day. Evelyn stepped close enough to see the freckles she always pretended she didn't have. "You saved me," she whispered, feeling foolish and also correct. The reflection blinked first for the first time. It lifted a hand, palm out, goodbye or wait, she couldn't tell. Then it mouthed one more word. Trade. The apartment seemed to tilt, just a little. Evelyn did not say yes. She did not say no. She sat down on the bath mat and leaned her back against the vanity and waited to see if the word would grow teeth. Midnight turned into 12. 9. The mirror breathed. She did not. At 2:45 an hour that had never meant anything and now meant everything, the building made a sound like a book closing. The reflection placed both palms on the glass. Evelyn placed hers there, too. The chill traveled into her arms, not mean, just thorough. She saw, in the smallest flash, the kind a person might deny later, another room on the other side, not her bathroom. Not any bathroom she knew. A different angle on the same sink. A towel folded carefully in a way she never folded. The sense of singing left in the air like perfume long after the person has walked out. Trade, the mouth said again. Softer. Then a shake of the head. Then, please. Evelyn pulled her hands back. No, she said, surprised at the strength in it. You don't get me. You get witness. She touched the glass again. Lighter now, like someone calming a scared animal. I'll look. I won't look away. The face in the mirror closed its eyes for a moment, as if that had been the permission it needed. From the hall, 3 slow knocks came and went, without stopping at her door. The bell on the nail did not ring. The closet chain did not lift. The bulb above the sink held steady with the dignity of a job done well. She slept eventually. Morning made coffee taste like coffee and not medicine. She bought flowers from the cart on Fife and put them in a jar on the back of the toilet because rooms like offerings. She cleaned the mirror with vinegar and newsprint like her grandmother had taught her and said out loud, "Thank you," to whichever direction deserved it. Days layered. She learned the building's honest sounds, again, the radiator's click, the stare that complains, the mail slot's little gasp at 11, 6. She learned which trucks on 6th are harmless and which ones make the glass think about shivering. She started sleeping with the chain set and the bathroom light low like a night watchman's lantern. She left a note for herself taped inside the cabinet door. Count to 30 before you move. It looks silly in daylight. At night, it looks like protocol. Sometimes, now, she wakes at 12, 11 and lifts her hand and the mirror lifts first, just a little. Sometimes, at 1:27, a shadow thinks about being a person in the doorway and changes its mind. When the freight train takes the curve too fast, the bell on the nail rings, one bright note, then calms. On the worst nights, when the knock comes and her name is said in her own voice from a mouth that is not hers, she looks at the mirror, and the mirror shakes its head, no, and she laughs quiet, breath only, grateful in a way that makes the room warmer. People ask her sometimes why she keeps the mirror. She says it's antique, she says it's sentimental, She does not say it's a companion who moves first when she needs it to. She does not say she learned to keep the light on because some promises work better that way. She does not talk about Miller Ridge, or the Oriental rug, or the daughter in a hurry to sell a house that sang to itself when no one was listening. If you stand in that bathroom and look long enough, you will think the mirror is ordinary. You will see a woman with sleep in her eyes, and a towel on the rack, and a plant doing its best. You might catch, just once, the face in the glass moving a heartbeat ahead. You might see it shake its head or nod just once, so you know the rules. And when the hour that used to be nothing arrives, and the building clears its throat, and something down the hall remembers it wanted to be let in, you will hear the bulb hum, see the bell hold still, feel the chain be a line you do not cross. You will keep your eyes on the glass. You will not turn off the light. And the mirror being what it is now will meet you there. A second early, and keep watch until morning.